The Tonight Show in the summer of 1973 ran on a tight, unforgiving clock. Everything was managed, planned, and timed down to the exact second of every segment break, moving with the efficiency of a machine that had been operating for 11 years and had the perfected systems to show for it. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Pam Grier arrived through the main guest entrance, passing close enough for the production crew in the corridor to feel her magnetic presence. At 24 years old, she was in the middle of a massive cultural shift that the entertainment industry was only just beginning to figure out how to process. Her film Coffee had come out earlier that year, and the response had been the kind of explosive reaction that changes the conversation around a person forever. She walked in with the settled, unarrogant ease of someone who understood exactly what she was becoming and had decided to be completely comfortable with it. As the confirmed guest, she was fully prepared for a featured, solo segment detailing her career and the new wave of action cinema she was defining. She was ready for the show she expected to do, but she was entirely unprepared for the second guest. Bruce Lee arriving as a surprise was standard procedure by 1973. He had a booking condition that had become a known secret, no advance announcements or promotion. He appeared as a surprise or not at all, believing it made for better television. With Enter the Dragon out for only a few weeks, the world had suddenly become hyper-aware of him, and the show had been trying to book him for months. He arrived quietly at 5:15 through the side entrance. The show began at 8:30 with Johnny's monologue warming up the room perfectly. When Johnny introduced Pam, the audience erupted in genuine, warm recognition. She sat down, direct and thoughtful, giving real answers about her roles rather than just performing them. But then Johnny looked at the camera with that familiar look that meant the temperature was about to shift, announcing he had a surprise guest, Bruce Lee. The curtain opened, and the audience reacted the way people in 1973 reacted to Bruce Lee walking into a room. It was immediate, loud, and carried a quality of genuine excitement that a talk show crowd rarely displays. 400 people who had all just seen him on the silver screen were now watching him walk toward them. He stepped to the desk, shook Johnny's hand, and then turned toward the couch, extending his hand to Pam Grier. She did not take it. She looked at his hand long enough for anyone paying attention to see the decision being made, and then she looked away. It wasn't aggressive, just a clean redirect of her attention that left his hand hanging in the air for 3 seconds before he lowered it and sat down. Johnny, master of handling awkward live moments, immediately tried to break the ice, noting that having two of the most exciting action stars on the same couch felt significant. Johnny asked them how they viewed their respective roles in this new wave of action cinema. Pam spoke clearly about what Coffee meant to audiences who had never seen themselves represented this way, and the physical discipline she had to learn. Bruce countered by explaining his philosophy of martial arts, distinguishing between action that was technically real and action that was merely performed. Johnny then pointed out their different approaches, contrasting Pam's raw, explosive quality with Bruce's precision and philosophy, and asked what one had that the other did not. Pam paused, looked at Bruce, and said that while he had years of impressive technique, she had something on screen that he did not: bullets. The audience laughed, but those close enough to see their faces caught the underlying tension beneath her smile, which Bruce met with a polite, measured expression. Johnny chuckled and agreed that guns did tend to be rather final, but the atmospheric shift in the studio had already begun to settle. Pam doubled down, asserting that all the technique and philosophy in the world, while highly impressive on a film set, might not hold up against the real thing. Johnny carefully suggested that Bruce might argue technique is the real thing, but Pam remained skeptical. Bruce, still smiling politely, calmly asked her what she saw when she looked at him. She looked him in the eye and told him she saw someone who was very good at something that only worked in a controlled environment like a gym or a choreographed sequence, doubting it translated to an actual situation where someone was truly trying to hurt him. Bruce replied that whether trained technique holds up under real pressure depends entirely on how it was built. If it was designed to look good, it fails, but if it was built to work against real resistance, the answer is different. When Pam asked how she would know which one he was, he simply said she wouldn't from where she was sitting. Pam shot back that she wasn't looking for respect but making an observation, and the audience went dead quiet. Johnny attempted to steer them back to safer ground by discussing physical discipline, but Pam cut him off, looking directly at Bruce to ask a question she had been holding back. She questioned whether his entire platform of real combat skill was actually true or just a story he told about himself. Bruce flatly stated it was true, prompting Pam to challenge him to prove it. He asked how she wanted him to do that, and she crossed a threshold. She asked if someone had a gun, could his technique stop a bullet? A few people laughed, assuming it was a wild joke, but the laughter died instantly when Bruce, without raising his voice or performing, looked at her and said yes. Johnny tried to break the tension by joking that he did not know what to say, which got a nervous chuckle from the crowd, but the gravity of the stage remained unbroken. Pam looked at him, realizing he was entirely serious, and accused him of elegantly avoiding her question. Bruce clarified that his answer was actually very precise. Correct technique applied at the right moment doesn't stop the physical bullet itself, but rather stops the person holding the weapon before the bullet can ever become relevant. Pam, unyielding, challenged him to test it right there on the stage. The audience reacted with a wave of uneasy murmurs as Johnny quickly intervened to clarify that they were speaking purely hypothetically. Pam shot back that she wasn't speaking hypothetically at all, she wanted him to get up and show her what he had. When Bruce calmly replied with a simple, "All right," the studio fell into a profound, stunned silence. Johnny immediately called for an unscheduled commercial break. The moment the on-air light dropped, executive producer Fred de Cordova rushed onto the floor to manage the crisis. He went straight to the couch, urging Pam to keep the segment professional and warning her that this direction could create serious problems for the broadcast. Pam stood her ground, insisting she was simply making a valid point about cinematic versus real skill. Fred then turned to Bruce, who quietly defended the exchange, noting that Pam was asking a real, valid question. Fred exasperatedly reminded him that while it might be a real question, The Tonight Show was a talk show and not a physical testing facility. Bruce looked at him steadily and made it clear that he was not going to pretend to be less than he was just to make the segment easier for the network. Fred stared at him for a long, tense moment before whispering something to Johnny, who nodded in agreement as the producer walked back to the production booth. The on-air light flickered back to life, and Johnny faced the camera, determined to guide the ship through the storm. Johnny welcomed the viewers back, noting that while the off-camera discussion was one of the most fascinating he had experienced in 11 years, they would continue in the realm of conversation. He turned back to Pam's skepticism and gave Bruce the floor to respond seriously. Bruce explained his philosophy that any physical technique trained solely in a studio becomes rigid and fails when the context changes, which is why he built his craft on adaptable principles rather than specific moves. When Pam demanded an example, Bruce referenced her bullet question, explaining that his approach relied on positioning, timing, and reading the opponent before the weapon is ever raised. If the gun is already pointed, it is already too late. He explained that training gives a person the ability to read a situation early enough that the bullet never becomes the relevant variable, comparing his ability to read people to her ability to read what a dramatic scene needs before a director calls action. The difference, he said, was simply the medium. She read scenes, while he read people. Pam sat in silence, her expression shifting from skepticism to deep reflection as she realized he wasn't deflecting her challenge but offering a profound truth. When she asked why he hadn't explained it that way initially, Bruce noted that she hadn't been asking yet, but testing, and testing is looking for a reaction, while asking is looking for an answer. The quiet in the room deepened as Pam unexpectedly brought up the refused handshake, admitting she had been caught off guard by his surprise appearance and had reacted out of a need to protect her territory. She clarified that she wasn't apologizing, but wanted him to know it wasn't personal. Bruce gently told her he already knew, explaining that her refusal was a real, honest response rather than a polite, reasonable one, and that real is always far more interesting. Pam studied him, admitting he wasn't what she expected. She had anticipated someone who constantly needed the room to validate how impressive he was. Bruce smiled and replied that he already knew how impressive he was, so he had no need for the room to confirm it. This prompted a genuine, surprised laugh from Pam, which instantly broke the remaining tension and brought the audience's real, warm laughter with her. Johnny leaned in, marveling at how a refused handshake and a question about bullets had yielded the best conversation of the season. He brought them back to the core of Pam's query about the bullet, asking if Bruce really believed it. Bruce answered that the useful version of his claim wasn't about seeking blind belief, but rather about a way of thinking about a problem, not having superhuman speed, but possessing the situational awareness to resolve a conflict before speed is the only option left. Pam sat with this, realizing she had finally received a real answer, and remarked that he was the one who had figured out what their tense interaction was actually supposed to be. As Johnny began the final wrap-up, Pam looked at Bruce and suggested he should have pushed back immediately when she refused his hand. Bruce countered that by letting it go, they had achieved a much better conversation, proving his principle that sometimes you get more by letting something go than by picking it up. With a quiet smile, Pam reached across the couch and extended her hand to him in the exact same gesture he had offered earlier. Bruce took it, and the audience erupted into a deep, appreciative applause. Johnny closed the show by telling the camera that what had just occurred on stage was a rare, unmanufacturable moment of reality. As the credits rolled, the audience remained in their seats, reluctant to leave the magic of the room, while Bruce quietly put on his jacket and exited into the night.